browsers are where everyone lives. That's why they're so important. And it doesn't matter how well you take care of your credentials and your secrets, it's all in your browser anyways. Like it's your browser memory, your browser storage. I mean, we see lots of really sophisticated attacks, especially in the cryptocurrency world, where it's really like stealing session tokens out of people's browsers and then using those to get past their post-MFA authenticated sessions to transfer funds. It's the most valuable attack surface, I think, in a lot of ways. You really want to be like what folks call a T-shaped person. So you want to be able to do a little bit of everything and then go really, really deep and be amazing at one thing. And that's really the people who have the easiest time getting jobs, becoming co-founders, et cetera, because they will be the best at one thing that they do. And they're also able to do a little bit of everything else between to kind of keep the lights on and do accounting and do finance. Starting off T-shaped is a great way to really kind of build the founder genes. Even if you look at how vulnerability management is done today, most folks say, I've got a million vulnerabilities. What do I fix first? Well, go look at CSEC, go look at, does it have a Metasploit module for it? Go look at, like, is there another exploit prediction score for it? But effectively, the existence of code for an exploit that's public is a way to force people to care about fixing a problem that they should care about. And so in a lot of ways, I think exploits are one of the few things that are a positive for driving change in organizations because they make theoretical real.
Today, I'm super excited to welcome a true pioneer in the cybersecurity field, HD Moore. If you've been in cybersecurity for any length of time, you've almost certainly used or heard of Metasploit, which HD created and developed into what's now the world's most widely used penetration testing framework. In fact, when I started Pentester Academy, Metasploit was one of the very first courses that I had built out and taught. HD has had an incredible journey in cybersecurity, from founding of Metasploit to serving as the chief research officer at Rapid7, and now as the founder and CEO of runZero, a company focused on exposure management. Back in 2006, he also started the Month of Browser Bugs initiative, which inspired our own Year of Browser Bugs, which we'll also talk about later. It's a privilege to have HD on the show, and I'm looking forward to diving into HD's experiences, the lessons he's learned throughout his career, and getting his insights on where security is heading. HD, welcome to the Be Fearless podcast.
Oh, thank you very much. Happy to be here.
So to kick things off, everyone knows you as the creator of Metasploit, but just going back in time, could you just give us an idea about, what was the inspiration for the idea? How did everything start?
Sure. Yeah. At the time, I was working for a very small security testing, security assessment, pen testing firm out of San Antonio. And we very much were not part of big tech, right? So really small group, hiring people directly out of the military, didn't really have a lot of cash to spend. So salaries are fairly low. And we're building out a toolkit that we use for doing assessments for mostly our financial institution customers. And the one challenge we had is, exploits at the time were not these professionally curated things, right? They were kind of the things that happened to leak through the community, things people kind of wrote and shared and traded almost like Pokemon cards behind the scenes. But it wasn't really like an exploit hub or things like that back then. And a lot of folks were there are really two big camps that were focused on getting rid of exploits. There's the software vendors who absolutely hated public exploits for their software because it makes them look bad and still does. And then you have the black hats who are then breaking into stuff using those exploits. They don't want anyone else to have them or know about them either. So very much the goal of Metasploit was to thumb the nose of both of those groups. And they both retaliated quite a bit.
And HD, when you started the project, I'm guessing that, you had to spend a lot of time writing out the initial plumbing code and then you open it up for the community. Could you talk a little bit about that? I think very few projects have had the community success that Metasploit has, and there's a lot of learning in there.
Sure thing. Yeah. I wrote the first version in Perl. It was terrible. Someone showed up and told me so. They said, wow, this is awful. I'm like, great. You want to help rewrite it? He said, sure. And that was our first, other developer. That was Spoonam when he joined. Later on, Matt Miller joined, helped us with rewriting all the payloads and interpreter and all the great stuff you know and love. And then three of us kind of just ran the project for the first about 4 or 5 years until both Dean and Matt Miller had to take a break for various different reasons. And then kind of it's back on me to kind of build the project. But we're really good at taking in ideas and helping people deliver code for those ideas. So somebody would say, hey, I want to work on an exploit for this thing. And I don't really know Ruby, but I know, Python. Can you help me turn it into a module? We say, yeah, sure. We go help them write it all up, clean it up. We fix some of the backend code on our side to make it cleaner, and we keep their name on it and we ship it. So that was a lot of it. It was we weren't expecting people to give us things that were perfect or even usable to start with. We're expecting folks to kind of give us as much code as they could write, as much data they can provide, and then we'd help them do the rest of it. And that really helped us build a strong community because folks were like, wow, that was very easy. I can like just give you kind of a gist of what I want to get done, and you guys will help me kind of build it out. And our take is like, well, we don't want to maintain code that we don't like either. So we want the code to be something that we actually like at the end of the day.
Yeah. And AC, just to create like a little timeline graph, like roughly when did you write like the very first line of code, all the way back, and give us some interesting, kind of like years where things progressed?
Sure. I think the project started back in 2002 or so. Most of what I was working on in those early days was around shellcode payloads. So at the time, the smallest Windows payload was about 768 bytes, or smallest public Windows payload. So if you're trying to cram that into an exploit, it was kind of large. It wasn't really doable. So I spent a lot of time trying to get the size of Windows shellcode payloads down to a smaller number and doing lots of data mining. So we took the big binders for MSDN DVDs and CDs and just ripped all of the cab files off of them, and then pulled all the offsets of all the different opcodes and things like that out of the DLLs and used that to kind of build out our opcode database. So a lot of stuff happened in the project before we had the framework, but the framework's probably what we're known for best. And so by the end of 2002, we had a bunch of shellcode tools. We had kind of a proof of concept of a CLI that kind of worked. And then 2003 is really when things kind of went full steam.
Awesome. I mean, I can tell you my personal intersection was roughly around 2007. I was starting this site called securitytube.net, which eventually became Pentester Academy. And the Metasploit Mega Primer was one of the first courses that I actually put out. And literally that kickstarted, my whole career into education and whatnot, and eventually running the company, getting it acquired and whatnot. So I think a lot of people, don't realize the kind of impact that Metasploit had back in those days, because that was really the de facto tool with which you could go demonstrate various vulnerabilities, pen testers, people teaching around the tool and whatnot. I mean, did people kind of write to you all the time, thanking you for that, for Metasploit and all the great things you were doing, or?
Oh yeah, we get lots of still get lots of nice email about helping people get their start, or we're job references for a couple hundred people too. So folks would applying for the first job or trying to migrate to the US to work for a tech company, they would say, "Oh, I contributed to Metasploit on the resume," and we go talk to their future employer and say, "Yeah, they were great. Here's what we did with them." So we did our best to like help over and get their careers rolling. And because like there was no company behind Metasploit, it was just like a bunch of hoodlums running the project, myself and our friends. So we didn't really care if people were commercializing it. We didn't care if you're doing training on it. It was great. More the better, right? So we want more people to understand and know it. I was doing training on the side to help pay the bills, but it wasn't something that's like competitive, right? Like no one's going to not take my training because someone else is doing another training someplace else. It wasn't really so it was nice to not be like in direct competition on the commercial side of anybody and not have to worry about it. There were some commercial tools who definitely didn't like us because they were trying to charge, $20,000 a seat and our stuff was free. So we we had a bit of a market friction, if you will, with some of the commercial providers of exploit tools.
Oh, fantastic. And HD, from there, that big jump from security researcher to entrepreneur, right? Could you tell us a little bit about that journey? Because I think a lot of people in cybersecurity, especially researchers, want to make that jump, but very few have. So
it's tough. I mean, I credit Rapid7 for a lot of it. Prior to there, I'd worked at 2 startups across 9 years, and both of them were probably the best way to say it is abusive to employees. They did terrible things to their stock options and to their employee agreements that basically just ripped the value out of employee hands and put it back to the founders and executives and investors. So they both had terrible outcomes to the employees, even though both got acquired eventually. And learning about how that worked and why it was possible for someone who's like the first or second employee at a company to walk away with nearly nothing after 7 years was really important to understanding how the business worked. So Rapid7 offered to acquire the project when I was on paternity leave with my first kid, and then I was like, yeah, sure, that sounds interesting. I'd rather do that than continue working here with the current management that was in place at the time. So it was really fun. And what I really like about that is Corey Thomas, who brought me in, who's now CEO there and has been CEO for a long time, at the time was just head of marketing. So Metasploit as a department was actually underneath marketing for the first 3 years post-acquisition. And we were just a marketing team that wrote a lot of code, basically. And we shipped 2 products in 18 months. So we were able to basically build a brand new competitive commercial product and pay our team's bills with it in about a year and a half.
Amazing. And from there, HD, the whole kind of move to like runZero. Can you tell us a little bit about like what was the problem space that you identified? What was wrong in the market, and what is the whole thesis behind runZero?
Sure. I mean, going all the way back to like the beginning of cybersecurity in the 1990s, you had 2 kinds of tools. You had things that you ran beforehand, before you get attacked, to figure out what you should fix. What are the exposures? What are the holes? What are the things? And then there's tools you run after the fact, after someone's trying to break in or after they successfully break in. How do you recover, detect, respond, etc. So I've always really loved the first half of that. I was like the active testing, trying to find vulnerabilities piece. And there really still are just two categories of tool these days. No matter how you look at your EDRs, you look at your vulnerability assessment, it's really preventative or reactive when it comes down to it. So runZero really is taking the last 20 something years of really interesting information leaks, network discovery techniques, just generally networking knowledge, and then really deep fingerprinting and data extraction, and turning that into like an amazing first inventory of all your stuff, and then another layer of exposure. So not only here's what I have, then also here's what's wrong with it. Here's how someone could break into it. And what we found is that the stuff that we're able to identify is just completely off the map for most organizations. So if you have a company who has been using vulnerability scanners and EDR and agents for a long time, we'll still find 25%, 45% more stuff. And that's because your vuln management's been not covering a bunch of subnets. Your endpoint agents only cover machines you manage, and you've got all this other stuff out in the periphery. And that stuff that you're not catching either with an agent or you're scanning is usually the worst stuff. It's the stuff that is not being updated, that no one knows who manages it. And that's where all the breaches happen, right? So when I was doing pen test work prior to starting runZero, I spent some time with the traders partners. We would keep getting in through things that the customer didn't realize they had. So we'd find, a DSL modem hanging in a closet someplace, find that as an entry point to the network. And it was always the kind of things, this crufty things in the corner that are always the weakest links. Because if you're a company that really cares about security and you put a lot of money into your security tools, everything you know about is going to be pretty good. So what really is the danger are the things you don't know about. And that's really what runZero tries to help you find is, find all your unknowns, identify all your exposures.
Okay. HT, can you give us any examples of, something you found in a customer site, of course, without naming the customer, which was
Sure.
like a big aha moment and a big reveal? Yeah.
There's been quite a few. The one that we see pretty common, at least once every 3 months, is that a customer will run, we have a network crawler. So what it'll do is try to find every routable private IP inside your organization, no matter where it is. So we'll look at like the entire RFC 1918 space. We do TTL limited discovery. We do crawling, sampling, things like that. And we're able to go find networks that you don't know were connected. And what we find often is that oftentimes companies are connected to other companies and don't know it. Wow. So, we see cases where the ISP misroutes their traffic. And so one of our customers is a national zoo, and you can actually reach the internal ESXi servers of their cable modem provider internal network from the zoo network because things were so misconfigured on the routing side. We see cases where you had an investment bank sitting inside of a bigger bank, sitting inside of a bigger building, and the investment bank was able to access not just the bigger bank's assets, but also be able to access the door systems, the controls, security control hardware for the building itself. So doing a pen test there, we're able to remotely unlock the front door as we walked in because everything was connected, right? So it's really surprising how wildly misconfigured networks are, and that's a lot of what we help folks understand. On the exposure side, we find things that are often detected by other products, but not really flagged as being significant. So a really common one is if you run one of the major vulnerability scans and you find a service called Zookeeper. And some people know what Zookeeper is, some people don't. But Zookeeper is kind of like a restriction tool. It's often used to kind of coordinate things between multiple nodes and store configuration data. And if you run a vulnerability scan from any major vuln scanner, it's going to say information level, we found a Zookeeper protocol. That doesn't really sound urgent, right? But Zookeeper is typically full of all your AWS credentials and your signing keys and your secrets. So if you find that on the network and there's no ACL on it, you're just dumping secrets all day long. It's literally your vault open to the world. And so when we find Zookeeper, we say, hey, this is actually a critical issue. A similar one is like Android debug backdoors, like the ADB Android debug service. We find those things in smart TVs and all kinds of Android tablets, kiosks on the front desk of lobbies, things like that. So you find these odd backdoor kind of unauthenticated data access exposures all over the place, and existing tools don't really do a good job of finding them, either because they don't run an agent on the system or because they're just not looking for these specific exposures that we happen to be focusing on because of our pen test background.
Yeah. No, I think you brought up a lot of amazing points. I mean, I'm curious, do people even have an internal network architecture map of what they have and what they don't?
they do, but does it match reality, right? That's the question. So there's usually a map, and that map was usually written 20 years ago by somebody who is, doesn't really want to talk to the IT people very often. And there's often this, just like you see chasms between the security team and the IT team, there's a similar gulf often between the network team and the IT team. The network team says, we just manage infrastructure. Do not touch our stuff. Do not look at our stuff. It is ours. We just deliver services to you. And the IT team's like, yes, but you're wide open and it's exposed and it's got these problems. Like, no, we're good. It's your problem. So you often see these kind of disconnects between different teams. And the network and IT gulf right now is one of the reasons there's so much exposure out there.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of remember, 20, 25 years back when everything had to go through a patch panel, at least you knew what you were patching. But now with Wi-Fi literally connecting to, pretty much all devices, super difficult to even figure out like what's really running on your network. One other question I had is a lot of organizations offer this whole like guest network when people come in and sign in, and then of course their internal private one. Have you seen instances where there's a leakage where, from the guest, you could end up like accessing internal private networks and things like that as well?
It's super common, but not for the reason you think.
Okay.
Or probably don't think, right? So the most common way that folks think about that is like, oh, I'm not restricting the ACWL on my Wi-Fi network. So someone coming from my guest network can route to another network they shouldn't be able to get to. That's the common mistake, right? What's actually more common, though, is that folks will be connecting their work laptop to an Ethernet port. They'll install a Docker or something like that on their local machine for development tools, and they also connect to Wi-Fi. And what's happening is their machine becomes a router. So if you install any of the Docker tools, any of the container management tools on your developer laptop, you're hooked into the Wi-Fi and Ethernet, you are effectively a router. People can route traffic through your laptop. So your developers, your executives, all the people who are both joined to Ethernet and Wi-Fi are effectively bridging those two environments. And we see that between guest Wi-Fi and core network. We see that between CDE, non-CDE for PCI scope. We see that for OT and non-OT environments. It's one of the most common networking fails. It's also something we're really, really good at identifying without credentials over the network. We can identify what the other IPs of a device are and figure out, can we route through that device? So that's one of the fun tricks we use.
Wow. I think, you brought up a very non-intuitive one. Even I wouldn't have thought that, people running Docker and everything would just end up acting as a router. But very interesting. And so HD, what are the plans for the company, where you are at your journey? I know that, you had raised a funding round and all of that as well. If you could just talk a little bit about that.
Sure. First 2.5 years is just me by myself. So I was still working for a trade as part-time doing pen test work. And I just wanted to get enough of it together, the whole business side, that I felt comfortable with the whole thing before bringing other people into the team. So by 2.5 years into it, I had 100 customers making about $1 million a year. So it was pretty good for just being solo, but I hadn't slept in weeks. And if something goes wrong with the servers, the downside of running SaaS is you're always on. There is no not on call, right? Especially as a one-person company, you can never take a break. You can't even go to the bathroom. Like something goes down, you have to get up, whatever you're doing, and go fix it. So that was really time to start bringing folks on when I had 100 renewals in the same month to go close out. It's a lot of paperwork. So I brought in a friend of mine to join as CRO and then eventually CEO. He was here for a little bit, about 3 years, helped us get to about 10 million before I took over CEO again. And then built that engineering team. And these days we're about 80 people and doing pretty well. We've got a ton of customers across a really wide client base, like industrial manufacturing, financial services, you name it. So just about anybody who has any kind of physical presence really benefits from runZero. And the more horrible your network is, the better, because we'll find the things that you have no idea are even there.
Yeah, amazing. And AC, this whole space of exposure management, like which direction is it moving? Any interesting insights which you can share?
Oh, it's hilarious, right? So Gartner, as usual, tries to play kingmaker on this stuff. So they create a new category. Everyone moves to the new category. They all say, I'm this too. So exposure management is a fun one because as far as I'm concerned, this is just the same preventative security stuff we've been doing since 1999. It's just under a different keyword, right? But the funny part about exposure management is everybody under the sun who does anything in security says they're also exposure management or CTEM, whereas CTEM being the term Gartner uses. So I can literally do a search query for exposure management. And one of the first hits from Google is our payroll provider. Why is my payroll provider competing against me with exposure management? Oh, they've got an MDM, but that's it. Their MDM is their exposure management. So it's really kind of folks are abusing the term quite a bit. But for me, what it means is we help people get ahead of exposures before they're exploited, rather than minimize the risk of an attack. So the quickest, fastest way we can help them isolate, identify, and respond to something before it turns into ransomware is how we win.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you brought up a good point. I think, Gartner plays with these words every few years, and the whole industry, unfortunately, at times has to kind of pivot, because CISOs pick it up, easier to get budgets for those things. And I mean, it's a very unusual thing that, for technical founders, when we look at it, we would kind of assume that, hey, you know what, here is the tech, this is how it was. But again, some of these acronyms and everything seem to govern, how people think. So HD, kind of going back in time, in 2006, you came out with this initiative, month of browser bugs. And the idea there was to go about like putting out, 31 bugs in 31 days. Could you go back in time and tell me what was the inspiration and a little bit about the project?
Sure. At the time, we were working with a bunch of security researchers on the Metasploit side. So Spoon M, or Dean, quite a other few folks that were, and we were all working on these browser fuzzers at the time. So we built these fuzzing engines. I wrote one called Axeman. What it would do is it dump every ActiveX control out of your system and then brute force find bugs in every one of them. So this is back when ActiveX was a thing in Internet Explorer. So we were sitting on like 1,000 bugs, like 1,000 real exploitable vulnerabilities at a given time. We're like, the vendors were not taking it seriously. They're like, there's no chance they're ever going to fix this stuff, right? So we gave up. We're like, we're just going to dump a bug every day until you guys kill ActiveX, until you guys fix your parsing engine, until you fix this. And it was effective. So that was the end of ActiveX. We just kept dumping a new vulnerability every day in different browsers, and ActiveX made up about half or a little more than half what we published. And it was just one of those things of trying to give the industry a wake-up call that things are really so bad that we have infinite bugs at this point. And now things are much better, right? We've got we have one engine that everyone uses, but at least it's a fairly secure one.
Yeah. And actually, in your mind, how has the web browser itself kind of like evolved from a security standpoint? I mean, I have some points on that as well, but would love to hear from your side, like, how have you seen the whole ecosystem evolve?
If you go back to like the 90s, the concept of if you get someone to browse to a web page you control, you can take over their machine, that was a given. We didn't think that was even a bad thing. We're like, oh, of course you can take over someone's Windows machine if they browse to Internet Explorer 4. That's just how it works, right? There was no concept of it being a security layer in a lot of ways. And Mozilla tried to change that, or Netscape Navigator, the Mozilla, and then later on other browsers try to draw harder security lines and things like that. But effectively, browsers are where everyone lives. That's why they're so important. And it doesn't matter how well you take care of your credentials and your secrets. It's all in your browser anyways. Like, it's your browser memory, your browser storage. I mean, we see lots of really sophisticated attacks, especially in the cryptocurrency world, where it's really like stealing session tokens out of people's browsers and then using those to get past their post MFA authenticated sessions to transfer funds. Right. So it's the most valuable attack surface, I think, in a lot of ways. But it's also really hard to defend because the thing has to work with every website in the world in addition to your day-to-day applications.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I can tell you, my own journey around this whole space is, once I, exited Pentester Academy and it was acquired, roughly that was the time when I was talking to a lot of red teams and I started seeing that the browser was starting to become the initial access vector. I mean, to your point, it's storage of credentials. Most of the time people are logged in post MFA. So a lot of the stuff is just streamlined, and the browser is the new endpoint. We pretty much have local apps, SaaS apps, local storage, cloud storage. And when I looked at the whole space, I saw that SASE, SSE, secure web gateways were the ones who were tasked with cleaning all of that, malicious traffic. And we did a big talk at DEF CON main stage last year, going back to, our own attacker roots. It's always fun to do that, where we showed how much of this was kind of broken. And then we started talking to a lot of folks, and we realized, to your point, similar to 2006, that people weren't looking at browser security in a serious way. I mean, there were enterprise browsers, but they were looking at an entirely different aspect of the market. So that's when we actually started this new initiative called Year of Browser Bugs. And of course, unlike what you had done before with the rest of the team, which is software vulnerabilities, our perspective here was more business logic vulnerabilities, more vulnerabilities in protocols and architectures, which are more difficult, to kind of change over the very next day. But of course, doing one a day was too much because we just couldn't, fuzz and figure out architectural ones. So we said, okay, why not just do one a month? And kind of like go behind, that entire ecosystem.
That's great. I'm excited. I've been following you guys. Really looking forward to the rest of them.
Yeah. I mean, I can tell you we are under massive pressure. So just this month, it's going to be public probably in a day or two. We just closed out a Series A round, but my research team is kind of pounding me and like, hey, what is the next bug? And I'm about to sit down with them and kind of figure that part out. But purely from an exposure management perspective, how do you look at like the browser itself? Like, is that play kind of like any key interesting role?
For us, not quite as much. We're usually looking at the devices, the servers, things like that. The browser side of things, I think it's just kind of a black box because there's only a few makers of browsers these days. you can still get the Internet Explorer in Windows. You have to trick people into opening up Office documents to load it. But effectively, everything is effectively Chrome these days. So we kind of just say Chrome. If you're using Chrome, at least it's got a sandbox. There's lots of things you can do to protect your system on the EDR side, but there's not a whole lot we can do for folks from that perspective of what we build. So it's not an area we really focus on, but it's definitely an area that's important.
Yeah, yeah. And I can tell you from our perspective, we've been trying to go ahead and, create a new category. And that's always a very tall claim to make. I mean, people start to cringe when they hear that for the most part, which is, browser detection response. And our whole idea was like, hey, could you create an EDR, which is browser native, browser first class citizen, where most of the things end up happening in the browser. HD, from your perspective, you've been a veteran at looking at all of this. What would be your thoughts around this whole browser attack surface? And yeah.
The hard part is that most folks who've built security extensions for browsers end up introducing more bugs than they stop.
Yeah.
It's just a really finicky thing to do because you're constantly fighting with the vendor's code base and their changes, trying to keep things in sync. And if you get something wrong there, like a good example would be look at a Tavis Ormandy just destroying LastPass repeatedly. Like he found millions of, I would say millions, but many, many vulnerabilities in LastPass's extension. And LastPass is supposed to be for your security. And yet it somehow makes you leak all your passwords when you runs a website. And so it's just a really hard thing to get right if you're only working at the extension level. If you're able to get into the browser itself and actually start adding hooks to the engine, then you have a lot more capabilities. You can actually do kind of like you said, in-browser EDR, but it's just really difficult to do with an extension-only model.
Yeah, yeah. One of the things, HD, I also want to kind of pick your brain on is when you look at this entire ecosystem, Chrome has started to dominate in a very big way, right? Because it's Google is behind. Everyone is kind of going ahead and trying to create a browser of Chromium. Unfortunately, even Brave did not succeed as much as we had hoped. Which is, I think even today, Brave has 40, 50 million installs at most. So how do you kind of predict the market? I know that the DOJ is also trying to break up Chrome from Google. I don't know if you've heard that news and all of that, but any thoughts around a single vendor kind of lock and what you've seen over the years when that happens?
It's tough. I mean, all the folks who are forking Chrome tend to run behind on the security updates too. So if you're running Brave, you're running Chrome, but with more exploits for a few days. They're all just slightly behind Chrome on the exploit patching, right? So that's the challenge of these folks. Anytime you're doing a Chrome custom build, you're not kind of always trying to follow up behind Google and the rest of the Chrome development team to keep up with both security fixes and functional changes. But beyond that, you have basically Safari is the entire ecosystem on iOS because they don't allow any other engine to be used. Using Mozilla, use Brave, use Chrome on iOS. On Apple, you're still running Safari under the hood. They only have one engine, and they don't let anyone else use a different engine. So you've got Safari ecosystem locked down on iOS. You've got Chrome literally everywhere else. And Mozilla, unfortunately, is just kind of wandered off into the forest a long time ago and now sells AI things or something. I can't figure out what they do anymore, but they certainly aren't delivering a browser people want to use.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the whole Mozilla story was a very sad one. I think, Google got them hooked with the whole ad revenue for the search bar. And from there on, I think they were fully dependent on Google and Chrome eventually ate it up. Yeah, I still remember, I think 15, 16 years back, I think Mozilla Firefox was the most popular browser for most people. There were so many interesting tools which was there with which you could do client-side pen testing and whatnot. Actually, shifting gears a little bit, I mean, I know no podcast can close without talking about AI.
So we can make an exception.
I think once we go above 1,000 episodes, we'll probably make it. But I'm very curious, from your perspective, when you look at things like exposure management or just entire the whole entire ecosystem trying to jump on the AI bandwagon. What concerns do you have as a security person? Any thoughts on that?
Well, I can say from the business side, we raised a funding round about a year and a half ago, and the multiples that security firms were getting, typically with a more multiple being how much revenue will you have next year times that multiple becomes your valuation. So prior to 2021, 2022, forward multiples were something 15 to 20x, 30x. So 30x is actually a pretty reasonable number. So if you were a $1 million ARR company or planning to have $1 million ARR the next year, you would get valued around $30 million when you did your valuation. Now, fast forward to 2023, and the security valuations have dropped down to 5x, 6x, 7x, even maybe 10x if you're really lucky. So you literally lost, a huge portion of your value when you try to go raise money. That means you have to sell more stock, lose more ownership to get less dollars to fund your company. Now, at the same time, if you look at AI startups, they're getting 60x, 100x multiples. So just like a few years back when the blockchain folks were getting 50x, 60x, like it's all going to come back and bite people eventually, right? So the reason why you're seeing AI plumbed into so many things top down, why companies are jumping in the bandwagon, is because investors are valuing it more for whether that's a reasonable thing or not. That's what they actually are doing today. Investors are valuing AI more, whether it makes any sense at all.
Yeah, no, absolutely, totally in agreement. And HT, one of the other things I wanted to pick your brain on, just as a cybersecurity entrepreneur, is nowadays we talk a lot about this platformization, right? Like, Palo Alto, all of these guys are starting to say that, look, point products can't exist for long. Every organization is just tired of having 25 different products, talk to their SIM or and all of that. So purely as, I know a lot of people, when they start off building a company as a cybersecurity entrepreneur, some of this could sound demotivating, right? Because all that means is, within a certain period of time, you probably have to exit to one of the big guys. Do you agree with what's going on right now in the market? What are your thoughts around this?
Depends on your size. When you're in the kind of like sub, $30 million range, you can get away with being just a single product company and you can do a pretty good job. And sometimes you go a little further beyond that, but it's really difficult to really go beyond that without having your own platform or without eventually becoming part of someone else's. The challenge is once you kind of cross that 30 million ARR number and you're trying to find a buyer, you're now too big for anyone to buy you. Like you have to go build the entire thing. So now customers expect you to be the one-stop shop for everything. And so that's really the challenge. You've got kind of an early window between like early revenue multiples until when you can find an acquirer. And then after that, there's this massive gulf between 30 million ARR and about 100 million ARR where no one can afford to purchase you, or at least no one will purchase you at a reasonable valuation. They'll buy you for scrap, like Lacework happened, for example, but they won't actually buy you at a valuation that makes your investors happy. So you really have to either, run to the first exit as quick as you can in the first 2 years to really sell your company to a bigger company early on, or prepare to, grin and bear it and just, kick butt for another 7 to 10 years. And there's not really a lot of paths in between besides dying. So we're definitely in that 7 to 10 year path. Like I'm in year 7 right now, and it's gonna be a fight every day. And what we do is I kind of like it when there's massive consolidation in the market because all those products are terrible. And especially if you put them all underneath one vendor, they just start falling apart really quick. Like
absolutely,
vendors are typically good at one product, and then all other products tend to be things they just chalk onto the invoice that you don't really care about, that are not particularly good. And so if we have to go compete against any of those other sub projects of the given company, we will beat them every single day that week. We'll give you better results, better quality, better data, faster, cheaper, all that stuff. The challenge, of course, is that larger vendor may come in and say, well, we'll give you that component for free as long as you renew your invoice for the base component. So something that's happened twice in my career now is that we've had customers who are also customers of antivirus companies, like either EDR or traditional AV. And those companies have been gone into the vuln scanning space some way or another. And then our customers are saying, hey, we're going to get a free vuln scanner from McAfee or a free vuln scanner from CrowdStrike if we're able to sign a renewal agreement with them. So we don't need to buy a vuln scanner this year. I'm like, yes, but it won't be very good. Like you're not going to find what you're looking for. And you just have to say, well, we'll see you in a year. We'll see when you come back and realize that this isn't meeting your needs and you need a better tool for it. So consolidation happens, and platformization is just a requirement of becoming a bigger company. You have to be able to sell a full turnkey solution, especially to smaller businesses that can't afford 5 tools or don't have the staff to manage more than a couple. They really just need one thing they can plug into. Larger companies, of course, can almost always afford a point solution. Like if you're a large bank, you can always afford a better point solution for something critical to your security. You don't necessarily need a platform. It's really the mid-market, the smaller side of enterprise that are stuck having to use platforms because they don't have the staffing to manage more than one.
Yeah, you brought up a great point. And you're right, SG. I mean, even I feel that there's always going to be that part of the market which would prefer best in breed rather than just buying something because it's all consolidated or super cheap. And as you said, a lot of times the bigger players just swoop in and basically make something completely free, trying to undercut or kill rest of the market. I mean, I don't even know if that's anti-competitive. I know that a long time back, like Microsoft, when it was actually giving away Internet Explorer for free against Netscape, that was an antitrust lawsuit. I don't know if that applies or not, but
well, Microsoft's doing it again now. They're giving away their OT scanning, their IoT scanning, their vulnerability scanning. They're discounting all that stuff if you have an E5 license, if you're using the rest of their Intune and the rest of their MDM stack. So it's just one of those things where any of those large vendors are constantly using their less great components of their product to keep the business they have.
Yeah. And I think with the acquisition of, Wiz by Google, I think a lot of the larger infrastructure vendors are also realizing that security is a very lucrative market to want to get into. I mean, I don't know how that's going to change the space if AWS is going to do something as well, but what are your thoughts on that?
That's also the challenge of creating any product tied to a particular cloud, is that you have to assume the cloud provider is going to eat your lunch someday. Like, they're eventually going to realize that's a good idea and just take it. Look at Elastic and AWS. You look at Mongo and AWS. You look at even some security tools in AWS, like Config, AWS Guard, Guard Duty, things like that. The large cloud providers end up basically killing competition in their environment after some number of years once they realize it's big enough that they can eat it. That's just kind of the name of the game. So I think you're really stuck in some cases when you're beholden to a single vendor. Main advice there is try not to, if you're going to do a cloud product, make sure it's multi-cloud.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you see so kind of shifting gears more towards the advice piece, a lot of security researchers, people who've had no entrepreneurial experience, want to become entrepreneurs, raise money, build products. What is your advice to them?
Probably two levels. I mean, one, just for personal development, you really want to be like what folks call a T-shaped person. So you want to be able to do a little bit of everything and then go really, really deep and be amazing at one thing. And that's really the people who have the easiest time getting jobs, becoming co-founders, et cetera, because they will be the best at one thing that they do. And they're also able to do a little bit of everything else between to kind of keep the lights on and do accounting and do finance. Like, I had to do all that crap as part of starting the company. And it's a lot of annoying stuff, like doing sales tax in each district, and you just have to do it. But it's not necessarily hard, it's just annoying and not necessarily your focus area. But if starting off T-shaped is a great way to really kind of build the founder genes, if you will. And then once you get into a little bit later down the line, and it really just comes down to running a business. Like, you want people to give you more money than you spend. That's usually the core part of it. And as much as people talk about startups just burning cash until they get to an exit, like, if you don't get to the exit, well, you either die or you go borrow more money again. And if you can't borrow more money, then you die. So a lot of being a startup is default dead unless you build a solid business foundation. And of course, the VCs always want you to go to really high multiples and to grow very fast, very quickly, because they're fighting against like federal interest rates, like to their LPs. Like, you have to consider, like, VCs are not, it's not their money most of the time. It's their large institutional money, their retirement fund money behind them, looking for some better returns than the market would give them just by investing in an ETF. So when the federal interest rates are really high, like 4.5%, 5%, you're now fighting against that 4.5%, 5% baseline in terms of your performance as a startup to your VCs. So just keeping in mind the kind of macroeconomic stuff, you need to be able to weather like a period of high interest rates, for example, when you're raising funds, because the market becomes much more competitive the higher the interest rates are.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And HG, when raising money from investors, right, you have these general purpose investors, of course, then you have friends and family, people from the community, and then you have very cybersecurity focused investors. Like, what is your advice to founders around that?
And the big one is go look at what they've done before. Who do they invest in? How well do they work with them? Go talk to the founders involved, ask them their opinion. Do they show up to board meetings and throw a tantrum? Were they friendly? Do they help them? Do they do intros correctly? How much control do they actually have on the business? Do they try to like pull over? Did they try to like operate it? Like, a lot of your private equity and even growth equity firms are very much focused on operating the company on your behalf. So something that's kind of, a lot of folks don't realize, a lot of the exits in security aren't published. They're referred to as investments. So you'll see a company that takes $120 million Series C. Well, guess what? That 80 million of that went to one of the founders and they walked off. But it's not considered an exit. No one talks about being an exit. They talk about being an investment. But what happens is usually the founder will sell 80% of their shares, take a big pot of cash, and they'll stay CEO, they'll stay whatever for a while longer, but they're basically being told what to do by the new investor. They've ceded ownership at that point. So a lot of the exits you see are actually stealth exits, being part of these secondaries or these larger rounds.
Mm-hmm. And do you think, given this entire climate, is it even possible or scalable to build an enterprise security product company in a bootstrapped way?
Yeah, I mean, in a lot of ways, it's never been better, right? I mean, you look at the AI agentic stuff, people saying, well, I can run an entire company of just myself and a bunch of bots. Like, yeah, let's see how that goes in a year or two. But like, I think you still have to be hands-on in a lot of places. So I don't think AI is going to change anything in that front. But I do think that all the tools you need to build a business are now, there's a lot less barriers than there used to be. You can create the entire company online with a couple clicks, $500 to Stripe Atlas or to something like Clerky. Like, I did all the most of the filing, most of the finance stuff all online in like a week and a half. It was not a big deal. So the barriers to actually building the company and getting set up are a lot lower than they used to be. And then it's just how quickly can you build a product? Can you get feedback from it? And the nice thing about SaaS software is that you can update it continuously, and your customers can see it continuously. So when we shipped runZero, the very first version back in the day, we're still called Rumble. It was terrible, but the whole point of it was like, let's get it out there as a beta. Let's start getting feedback. We want everyone to tell us how bad it is, so we can start adjusting and tacking. And 6 months of the beta later, we had about 6,000 users, and we had like a really clear map of where we needed to be. So the other, I guess, recommendation is just get your product in people's hands as quick as you can. And there's really two thoughts there, two models. Some folks go with what they call design partners, so a couple of very large firms that tell them exactly what those firms want to build, and then those firms get a discount on the product once it's shipped, right? The other model, though, is you just go wide and broad. You get as many people playing with it and poking at it as you possibly can. That's the model that we took early on. So we had tons and tons of feedback. Like, we didn't have to hire a product team ever in the company's lifetime because we just get so much feedback from our customers already. We have 30,000 odd community users on top of our actual active customer base. So between all those folks, anytime we get something wrong, someone tells us, right? And it's a really great way to keep tabs in the community. So I'd recommend like going one of those two routes, either having some trusted enterprises you want to work with as design partners, or just go super broad, even with a product that's not quite ready.
Yeah, no, I think that's really good feedback. A lot of people just wait and build for too long a time, and then they realize the market just required something entirely different, or it's a nice product, but people just don't want to pay for it.
Yeah. Well, you have to start with something, like build something that you know is going to be good, just as useful 10 years later, right? So what we started off with runZero, it's like, here's TCP/IP. It's not going anywhere. Let's make a really, really good thing that speaks TCP/IP, whether it's V4, V6, and the protocols and services. And no matter how many cloud services people use, underpinning all that still is plain old internet traffic, and we can do amazing things with that traffic from passive and active and so on. So for us, it was very much like, we also do integrations. We also do some of the chasm stuff. We integrate different feeds. We do vulnerability prioritization, all this other stuff. But the core value that we brought is still just as useful as it was when we started the business 7 years ago.
Yeah, wow. And HD, kind of backtracking a little bit over here, when it comes to security researchers, I mean, you mentioned right now with AI, there's so much of automation, so much of things happening, and every field is probably going to progress in leaps and bounds, kind of like, hopefully. So if you were a security researcher right now, just entering, like, what advice would you give on how to go about it? Because everything is automation. The other one thing I also want to touch upon is, back in the day, we would have to literally look at the code to understand how things work. But now with this entire AI generated code, even for POCs and things like that, I think people are getting further and further away from the actual granular details of how systems work. So is this going to change the next breed of security researchers? So both of these.
Oh, probably. I mean, the challenge is kind of two ways, right? It's that folks are building a lot of things they don't understand. And when they're asking AI to explain it, they don't know whether it's right.
Correct.
Because they don't have the skill set, they don't have the background for it. So I think as a security researcher, one of your best bets these days is still doing bug bounties. It's painful. You don't really make a lot of money on it, but it's a great way to, like, if you have a job that doesn't involve offensive security today and you really want to get into it tonight, to now, this second, just go sign up for bug bounties and start whaling away on random companies. It's fun. And you don't get put in jail for it, and you learn a lot really quickly. So it's a really great way to start, is just doing bug bounties. But when you start looking at the AI stuff, I mean, keep in mind there's all these like vibe coders, et cetera, out there throwing crappy products together in the drop of a hat that may look fancy, but they're just burning tire fires in the back that no one knows how they work. So these are the products that we're not going to be buying in a few years, if not already. And so they're going to have even worse security problems, because not only are there security bugs, but no one wrote the code. No one even knew. There's no single person that even knows how it works, right? So I think we're going to end up with a lot of unmaintainable, crappy code that is just going to. Another thing that a lot of folks don't realize is the agent code generators are usually looking at a snapshot in time for the code samples they came from. So you'll see code overrepresented from like Stack Overflow from 2006, when you really shouldn't be using that code at all, but that's just what it trained on. Other part that really kills me about AI is, like, one of the biggest problems in security is that documentation examples are always really bad. So if you follow, like, a lot of the vulnerabilities in Microsoft's ecosystem, or because someone followed Microsoft example code and copied it word for word and then used that to build their product. And that example was bad. That example had a security vulnerability baked into it. The challenge now is that all the examples people are using aren't public. They're not on the web. You can't go back to Microsoft and say, fix your sample, because they're not looking at a sample, they're looking at what the AI spit out. You can't correct the AI sample effectively. So all the kind of the state of security, if you will, has been baked into these models in a point that you can't really update and fix them. You're kind of stuck with bad security advice forever in these models till they retrain them.
Yeah. No, you bring up a very good point. And that's really where it's going to be very interesting to see, like, how security research itself is going to evolve, and things like code review, to your point, right? If all the code is being spit out by AI agents, I'm sure someone's also going to build agents to go ahead and do code reviews and things like that. So it's just layer over layer of, no one really figuring out what happened. So yeah.
There's a great comic of folks who, someone using AI to generate email and sending off to a bunch of people, and then someone using AI to read the email and then delete it right away. Like, that's going to be where we are. We're going to have AI on both sides, and I'm not sure anything of value is created there.
Yeah. And I feel definitely this is going to open up a massive amount of like vulnerabilities and bugs and issues and all of that, which attackers are going to take advantage of, right? Because no one knows how the system is running anymore.
Yeah. And all the kind of quick hop tools for building this stuff. We've already seen issues with the MCP servers, for example. Like, somebody wrote a really nice, damn vulnerable MCP server recently. So you want to do security testing against an MCP, which is model control protocol used for a lot of these LLMs or LM tools, like Claude. You can go actually do pen test against an example vulnerable server now. So we're starting to see security catching up against these tools, taking on both the frameworks, the tooling, the local tooling. People have found vulnerabilities on Llama's web server. But the stuff isn't no better than any other software, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So HD, as we move towards the end of the whole talk, just wanted to ask you like two interesting questions. One is, what's a security myth or misconception that you wish you could finally put to rest?
I think the one that we've been fighting on most of my life has been, exploits are bad. Like, a lot of folks, vendors don't like them, black hats don't like them. A lot of folks don't think exploits are good. But if you look at what an exploit does in the world, an exploit makes people pay attention to something they would have ignored that would have then been used against them later on. So even if you look at how vulnerability management is done today, most folks say, I've got a million vulnerabilities. What do I fix first? Well, go look at CISA, go look at, does it have a Metasploit module for it? Go look at, like, is there another exploit prediction score for it? But effectively, the existence of code for an exploit that's public is a way to force people to care about fixing a problem that they should care about. And so in a lot of ways, I think exploits are one of the few things that are a positive for driving change in organizations, because they make, theoretical real.
Yes, I think you brought up a very good point. And a lot of times, HD, even what I've encountered is when we go talk to potential customers and say, look, here is this new exploit, here's this new attack, whether we discovered it or someone else, people's immediate reaction is a little bit like of frustration. A slightly visceral response is like, oh, are you guys creating exploits just to create, a need for your product and things like that? But to your point, attackers are going to do the same thing, if researchers don't get to it first.
We saw that with the month. One of the reasons for the month of browser bugs was the same thing. We saw that right around 2005, more vulnerabilities were being exploited in the wild before they were reported than the other way around. So up to about 2005, public exploits drove exploitation. So you release an exploit, and then attackers would then use it. By late 2005, attackers were finding and exploiting vulnerabilities in all these browsers, and no one was finding out about it until after the attacks. And so when Metasploit started publishing all the browser bugs, we ran into a lot of conflicts. We ended up killing a lot of the black hat bugs by example. There's one called like set slice in IE that we found that first one tried to buy it from us for like $5,000, and it was super silly. But then later on, we found out people had already been using it in the wild for like 3 months by the time we found it. So just because you found something doesn't mean someone else hasn't been using the same bug for a year and a half, right? And you need to kill those things as quick as you can.
Exactly. And given, you talked about exploits, I just want to get your thoughts on the recent announcement that CVE is going to kind of shut down. I don't know what your thoughts are around that.
The challenge right now is so many security programs are based on CVE alone. So there's a really popular EDR, many actually EDRs, that the only vulnerabilities they report are ones with a CVE. But half the stuff that I work on here at runZero doesn't have a CVE and will never have a CVE, and it's still a direct way to take over your company. Those tend to be like just logic bugs. They tend to be open data stores, missing credentials, default credentials, stuff that just never gets reported to MITRE, or that MITRE never got around to sending a fix for. A gentleman named Peter Kim does amazing security research. He just posted 81 different vulnerabilities in a single product, where about 30 over about 3.5 years that the vendor just still hasn't fixed most of them. Wow. And about 30 of those never got a CVE because MITRE didn't respond. So on one hand, CVE being, good, bad, dead is one thing, but I would argue it wasn't super useful to start with. And folks who are only looking at vulnerabilities with CVEs are already missing a large portion of their attack surface.
Very true. I think you brought up a great point, which is, and this is something even I've encountered is, unless it's a CVE, nobody takes it seriously. And it's almost like then CVE becomes this whole kind of gated community. is if you can't get in, it almost feels like what you found isn't good enough or isn't important enough. And you're right, like, when in reality, there's so many other things which are important and people should be fixing. HD, last question, which is, after all your accomplishments in the industry, what challenge are you most excited to tackle next?
I still like what I do in kind of early days. I like finding stuff, discovering things, I like helping people identify exposures and fix them. It's just kind of my whole life has been around that, from BBS, war dialing, all the way through phone systems, all the way into internet stuff in between. It's an amazing world out there, and it's really cool to kind of reach out across the internet and interact with folks all across the world, whether they want to or not, in some cases, with exploits, with networks, tools, and so on. So it's neat. Like, it's a crazy technical world out there. A lot of folks don't realize how interconnected it is. A lot of folks only think of the internet as being web browsers and web stuff. And I still get a lot of enjoyment out of looking at everything else, looking at the infrastructure that runs the world.
Yeah, no, amazing. And in closing, I can tell you, HD, personally, I think my entire career, I was born and brought up in India. Now I'm in Palo Alto, but back in the day, I can tell you there were only 2 projects which made a tangible impact in my own life, which allowed me to go on security research, eventually become an entrepreneur. One was, DEF CON Black Hat, which, Jeff Moss created. And the other is actually Metasploit.
Oh,
because had you not created that, me sitting in India, there would have been no way for me to be able to explore that whole world of, vulnerability research, exploits. I can tell you, I've spent hundreds of hours going through Meterpreter's code, trying to figure out, how the whole in-memory kind of like, DLL reflection and all of that worked. Then trying to see if I could write my own code along with that. And back in the day, that was the only way, right? You could just look at code and learn. So I would say from my side, my gratitude, super heartfelt thanks for what you did. Had a tangible impact in my life. I'm sure in, everybody, so many other people as well. So thank you so much for taking the time. It's an honor and privilege to have you on the show. And I hope to get to meet you in person at RSA, Black Hat, DEF CON, wherever you might be going this year. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much.